Hello, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I am Cherie Burton, and this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are, who they were created to be. Today, we're going to talk about managing your personal energy state, that grand key to your personal transformation. Whatever you're trying to heal, whatever you're trying to awaken to, whatever you're trying to clear out or get clarity on, it all starts with the vibration and frequency with which you are moving with in your inner life. So where your inner energy world is flowing, your physical outer world is showing. Oftentimes when there's been something happening in the energy or the frequency state, it takes a while for it to show up to your consciousness. It takes a while for it to show up to your physical senses. So that's why it's important to do certain things to kind of manage that. So we're going to talk to Dr. Alison J. She is quite a long list of amazing credentials. She's lived all over the world. She spent a lot of time in Asia that she'll talk about. And she's learned sort of these master mind, body, energy techniques, being a practitioner. And she's done quite a bit of work as a best-selling author in writing about this. But really, it's her lived experience, how she came to attune her own frequency and then develop her gifts as she's working with people one-on-one and in groups. She's really specialized in chakras, or you could pronounce them chakras, as the intersections of our mind, body, spirit. So she's going to talk about how we store things in our body and how we kind of transmute or transfigure them rather than just going to all this effort to tear it down or break it down. So a lot of this has to do with some of the feminine energy flow concepts that we've been talking about on this podcast. And remember also to join us on Women Seeking Wholeness in our Facebook group. I'm going to be launching something super cool within the next couple of months, and you're going to want to stay tuned to that as we develop these conversations a little bit more and dive into, again, how you can attune to your soul voice. So a lot of the information that Alison shares, as well as what we kind of discussed together in this episode, have to do with coming into your own attunement and opening to that receptivity to receive more light, truth, and transformation. Dr. Alison, I am so grateful that you've joined us. I've just been perusing your stuff and I'm like so excited. And just with our pre-conversation, I just have the best feeling. My whole energy stuff is vibing, and that's how I can tell. Like my skin is vibing. So
good receiving.
Well, where are you now in the world?
I am in Florida, the West Coast, on the Gulf of Mexico.
Great. Must be warm there.
Yes, I'm sitting outside in the sun and the birds are singing. You'll probably hear that.
I am hearing that. Yeah. So I was like, where are you in a jungle?
Well, there is a cypress swamp, right, that I'm looking at in the backyard. So yeah.
Well, you just have this eclectic background and so rich with just sort of how you were, it feels like how you were mentored by these things that just showed up, but yet you're such an adventurer that you also tracked a lot down. Let's start with your journey in Asia. You lived there and studied there for like 10 years, right?
Yeah, I did.
And is this kind of your opening to learning about subtle energy and chakras? I mean, kind of walk us through that a little bit.
No, it wasn't my opening. I actually was in the midst of a session. Let me back up just a little bit more. I was in politics as a political campaign organizer, getting folks elected to, at that time I lived in California, to the state legislature and then the federal as well. Folks who would write environmentally protective legislation, not just folks who would support it. It was very logical. And I was really excited about it. I was really on, and it felt really good. And I succeeded in actually getting the first Latina woman elected to the California State Assembly, who ended up saving the last patch of green space in the LA basin. So that felt really good. And then it was also really stressful. So I found a book leapt off the shelf at my feet so that I couldn't walk any further on meditation when it was so stressful and intense, in order to help me navigate successfully what I was doing on the campaign. So I completed that work and ended up traveling overseas for about 6 months, living in a couple of different places for a month at a time. And that wasn't my first time overseas. As a senior in high school, I actually also did an exchange student down into Venezuela. And so I had an adventurous spirit, one might say, from the start. So fast forward, after that trip, I came back to the States, did my master's in public administration and public policy with the focus on environmental conservation, and came out with my master's. And as I was completing my master's, I was teaching meditation to adults by that time. I had worked with the Native Americans in medicine wheel ceremonies and had learned about animal symbolism. And so I had created my own gig, taking people on kayak treks and canoe treks up on the freshwater rivers here in Florida and pointing out the animals and talking about the symbolism, because I'd also trained with the Audubon Society as a part of my master's to point out birds on bird tours with them. So I had the mystical meeting the physical in my life all the way through, but in a more professional way with what I've just told you. So when it got to the point of placing with my master's into public administration to help protect the environment, I was looking at both NGOs as well as governmental organizations. And Cherie and listeners, there was nothing that matched, and it felt flat. It felt like, that feeling when you're pushing against something and there's resistance, there's not opening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So trying to make something fit that doesn't want to fit.
Yep. So I observed that phenomena and asked my intuition, okay, what's up here? And so I ended up getting guided to the idea that if change is going to happen, it's going to happen one consciousness at a time, and then we'll hit threshold with enough people's consciousness or vibrations raised so that we'll hit threshold, the 100th monkey theory. So I switched into using my bachelor's, which was in creative writing and English literature, and taught in the classroom. Meanwhile, I had learned my first energy medicine modality. So I ran holistic wellness and energy medicine sessions alongside the classroom public school teaching. And after a couple of years of doing that, I was in a session with a client. My hands were over the womb area, and I found myself asking, man, I'm getting really good results here. How could I get even quicker, faster, more robust results? And so that hit at the same time I was realizing the sense of adventure wasn't really happening in my life. And I had pretty basic needs and still wasn't having an easy time making ends meet as a teacher with a master's and a slight student loan to pay back and basic desires. And so that wasn't okay with me. I asked what else was possible. My guidance, or intuition, when I say guidance, sent me to a series of interviews. It was a weekend where I was interviewing with directors of international schools in the international school system. I got offered a bunch of jobs, realized that I want to accept the one over in Taiwan, the seat of where the traditional Chinese are still able to observe some of their more traditional practices, because it's a small democratic island off of mainland. And that was the seat of not only who understood how subtle energy works and who could help me get more robust results in the energy medicine sessions and help boost my understanding of meditation, but also they were still using it. It wasn't like in the West, how it's been shoved underground into the mystery schools from the alchemists once the Enlightenment happened. So, and my first major, by the way, was psychology. And after 3 semesters of it, I was aware that I wasn't getting an answer to the question of, well, how do we be the happiest, most thriving versions of ourselves? It was all about like the hardwiring and applying it to the capitalistic model for industrial management. And it just was so missing the mark because they were trying to prove themselves as a hard science. So I lived in Asia for 10 years. I eventually traveled in between semesters one time during Chinese New Year. I always traveled throughout Southeast Asia. I didn't come back to the States in between semesters with that 3 to 4 week break, depending on the scheduling of the Chinese New Year when it hit. I went to India and got my yoga teacher training there, even though I had already been teaching meditation in
Wow, that would be so cool to do that in India.
Oh my God, it was. And it was a really functional school too, Cherie, because the owner, it was Indian, but he was married to an Irish woman. So they had a mixture of Westerners and Indians, traditional Indians, like the Brahmin philosophy teacher for the philosophy units of the yoga teacher training was a Brahmin. We had an Ayurvedic teacher for the Ayurvedic component, and then we had a Westerner for the anatomy. So it was just very
what an education. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it was really, really great. And so, meanwhile, while I was in Taiwan working as a teacher and administrator, I was also on the side still running energy medicine sessions for expats and local Chinese, and was really increasing my understanding of subtle energy and how it flows. I was doing research at nighttime when I wasn't working out at the gym, or on the weekends. I would always get at least one treatment per week, and I would talk to them. And what I had for conversational Chinese about energy flows, and I'd get reflexology and point to the chart, and I would get Tuina massages. And then when I'd go to Bali or Thailand, I'd be asking questions about how the whole mind, body, spirit system works. I had already been, because at this point, I think I was at my third energy medicine modality. So I picked up trainings along the way and learned Qigong and began to teach Qigong too at one point. So I was really steeped in the understanding of the connection between our minds and what we do in meditation, and how that affects the energy flow and how energy flows in our subtle energy system of the chakras. So I was combining the traditional Chinese understanding of how energy flows, and then coupling it with the Buddhist, which was extrapolated out of the yogic path, practice of meditation. So I was combining like the Chinese along with the Indian understanding to come up with this. What I created was the vibrational upgrade system to get the most beneficial effects and results on behalf of my clients. So I was actually getting the question answered. Well, this is how you get more robust results for your clients. So after 10 years, Sherry, I returned back to the States with my mission of, my God, there is so much more suffering than is needed in the States and in the West, because we just run from our consciousness. We don't go into our minds. We run as if there's a boogeyman in the closet or a monster.
We're all in fight or flight, right? We're all just in survival mode, and and I see this with the most reverence. Like most all of us are just asleep most of the time. We're just running programs that have been handed to us, and or ways of thinking, doing, and being that don't require a lot of. It's just the rote. Almost kind of, I'm thinking of the Matrix as I'm listening to you. I'm just thinking of the Matrix. But we can get to that later, but yeah.
So what you just said was really great. Why? Because I say that, I did my first book. I wrote my first book the last year in Asia. It's What If There's Nothing Wrong? And in it, I explore various holistic practices from both the Chinese and the Indian culture, India, subcontinent India, and contrast those holistic models with what we do in the West for our medical care model and our psychological care model, and how we would benefit by looking at this subtle energy. That, look, here's a new machine that's been created that does measure subtle energy. And here's another piece of scientific evidence that confirms that subtle energy does do something. It does exist. And, at that point, all the cutting edge science that existed for measuring meditation's effects and measuring subtle energy and where the chakras are. So one of the pieces of science I got was that it's around, and this is really generous, 85%, I find it much higher, of what we make our choices from is from subconscious and unconscious parts of our brain. That is at most 15% of what we're making our daily choices that creates our lives from are the thoughts that we can hear. So yes. That
is really telling. I just want to put a little pause here and just kind of dive into that a little bit. I am an avid learner. It sounds like you are too. Most of my life, I've been a seeker, like all of my life, I should say. And I'm just at this space where I'm kind of like culling. That's the best word I have. Just culling and like marinating on what I've already received, instead of jumping into the space of voracious learning. Even though that is such a huge part of my personality, it's almost like I'm being called to come back inside to what's already been gathered, and to a remembrance of the, I guess you could say, the stuff of the stars, that I'm made from. And that might sound a little to some people, but it's like, no, like we hold that in us. And when we're talking about things like, chakras and energy systems and subtle energy and everything, we are part of this vast field, but also we are a field unto ourselves. And that, and I'm just awakening to kind of how like everything's just sort of interrelated, but you take one part out of that field and it's incomplete. And so it's just fascinating to me, just the inner workings of how all this interrelatedness and how people meet. And, but anyway, I just wanted to insert that there, that like, that this part about us kind of being in this trance, if you study neurolinguistic programming or that kind of stuff, it's like, yeah, we're all kind of like dumbed down a little bit, and we're not super conscious because we've been so habituated. And so I feel like the task or the practice always throughout your entire life is to just keep coming back in, just checking back in. And when you're talking about subtle energy, I would love to know what you found that was so groundbreaking for you, because you had been studying it for so long. And maybe it'd be helpful right now before you answer that, to share with our listeners your understanding or your definition as you know it, because it is kind of hard to put language around it, of what subtle energy actually is and how it impacts us.
Okay, so you just said a lot. That would be really fun to respond to. So
I always do this to my guests. I say like 5,000 things and then I ask them a question.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
With like 10 parts to it.
Well, it's just yummy, everything that you just said. So one of the things that I find myself doing with the masterminders who come in, and even when they come into my signature program, Magic, Manifestation, and Money Flow, I ask them to stop looking for information. Then another thing you said, when I was at one point at the international school I was teaching at, I began to teach AP Psych, and it was either an AP Psych or it was in an English literature course on, I was teaching the Romanticists. I was talking about, and I was taking from everything I knew about not only Carl Jung and my studies of psychology, but also energy and how it flows. And we'll get to that in just a sec, in consciousness. And I called us, me on my own, you on your own, a localized consciousness, where we create our own field. And then, and I had already had Qigong and was teaching Qigong at this point, which matters. And so then what I called the Qi, or the vital life force energy, that's the translation for Qi into English, or prana, that's the yogic term for energy that flows. Then that Qi that flows throughout all of the earth, all of the rocks, all of the trees, the birds have it in them, they're flying on it. What makes up the non-localized field, we can then learn how to connect with, and we very much connect to it more easily when we have cleared our chakras and purified our consciousness to a certain level. And then life gets really fun.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's kind of scary.
Yep, it is. And so
it's just so unfamiliar, because what we do is the ego creates all these safety mechanisms and protections around us.
Yeah.
To keep us, to obviously keep us safe. But the downside to that is we over-identify with our form, with our structures around us, with our bodies. I'm all about getting in your body. I'm not saying to detach from your body, because that is the feminine. She is embodiment. But at the same time, it's so easy to just get lost in, just kind of like that vacancy that I used to see in myself. Before I kind of had I don't want to say that I'm awakened, because how do you ever even know? But like when I was going through my dark night of the soul, and I was kind of transitioning through this, like questioning everything I knew, and kind of just looking in the mirror, it's like, I don't want to have that nice smiley look anymore, that everything's okay. Because I was taught my whole life to just stay on the spiritual plane. And you've probably heard the term spiritual bypassing, but that's what I was taught. I was taught that, like, if anything uncomfortable comes up, do all these spiritual practices, and then if it doesn't go away, then something's wrong with you. That you're not doing it right. You're not connecting to God the right way.
That's so not sweet or kind.
I know. Well, I'm sure that was not an overt, intentional, spiritually abusive thing, but I internalized it that way, as do most people. It's like, if I want to be happy, if I want to feel alive, if I want to feel free, I have to go by these rules and laws, and you can say commandments or doctrines or however you want to say that, dogmas. If I do these things and I checklist these things and I'm still not okay, something's still amiss, then that must mean that I'm too dense to figure out the process, or I'm not worthy. That's the worst.
Yeah. And that's external authority sources. Yeah.
So circling back to this, I think this ideology that exists in a lot of spiritual communities, even yoga communities, I've seen this, religious communities where, when you are experiencing that real raw, and you could call it subtle, because there's a spectrum of subtle energy. And
Yep.
And when you attach to what I call the real with a capital T and a capital R, it's not always comfortable and sweet and smiley and love, light, joy, peace, everybody. And I felt like I had to connect into that, to go into my traumas, to go into the collective unconscious of what I've perceived as many ancestresses of women who have been suppressed and silenced. And it was like, that's real. That's living in me too. So to deny that, I just feel like it was understanding energy psychology, and it was really putting that into practice and understanding that I have this duality that exists in me. And it doesn't make me evil, and it doesn't make me more righteous. It's just there. It's the container of our experience. So anyway, I still want you to understand. I still want you to define for us how you see subtle energy, and how you have I don't know if personalized it is the right word, but have you maybe integrated it and seen it now versus when you first started on your path?
That's such a great question you just asked about, like, maybe it's not personalized. No, it's neutral. And in fact, that's when you know you've hit a certain more quote unquote advanced level of understanding, is when it's neutral. So the whole first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong, I talked about energy.
Can I just say I love that? What if there's nothing wrong? What a freeing question.
Thanks. That's how I launched myself after a decade in Asia, coming back to the States with that question. And it's been interesting, the response.
Like, no, there's so much. Yeah. But we just like, so you're talking about coming to a place of neutrality.
So in that place of neutrality, what I mean by that is so many different things, but the simplest way to say it is a purified consciousness where, for example, you gave some of the collective, what I call conditioning. You also gave some of the imprints that get passed down through our ancestry. And then karma, which took me a lot of time and tens of thousands of dollars to learn, to get trained in how to clear it, because it can be persnickety. And then traumas, whether this lifetime or other lifetimes, or because if a chakra means wheel, which it does, and that wheel is meant to turn, and it's what it's meant to turn is vital life force energy throughout our system. And when I say system, I mean mind, body, and spirit together. You could just picture it layers if you want. So we have 7 main ones distributed throughout our body, starting at the tailbone, and some people say starting at the crown. I'm like you, Sherry, where, I mean, I have a certification as a personal trainer as well. I'm all about being in the body and learning how to thrive from our vantage point of being a consciousness, awake, alive, and ready to thrive behind our eyes that circulates throughout our body. And a chakra is a wheel that is the intersection of the mind, body, and spirit. So they're like 7 main, you could think of them as urban centers along the spinal column. Each one has all of these side routes and interstates even and highways where energy travels along from one chakra to the other and out to our fingertips and down to our toes and to our elbows and knees. And the more that we purify our consciousness with what I've come to understand is clearing out previous conditioning or collective unconsciousness or imprints from our parents and lineage or karma or past life, because I can access past lives and karma and past life traumas and past life contracts or past life vows through the chakra, because it's the intersection of the mind, the 3 levels of consciousness, sub, un, and conscious mind, body. That's obvious. One example, though, is that every chakra is connected to one of the major endocrine glands. So that's the hormonal system. Every chakra also, it's been seen that it has the biggest gathering of nerve plexi along the spinal column. Wherever there are the chakras, it happens. It just so happens that there is the biggest gathering of neuroreceptors that receive messaging from the brain along the spinal column where these chakras are. So those are two. Yeah, those are two.
So fascinating, because I'm also traditionally trained in psychology. That's my undergraduate degree. And I was not, taught anything about anything but thought forms. And it's like the rest of your body exists to carry your head around.
Totally.
But that's so anyway, keep going. I'm loving it. I love chakras. I've been studying this. And I'll explain why I had to go underground with it for a while, because I started talking about this stuff like 20 years ago and people looked at me like I had 5 heads. Like, what have you been smoking? This is so evil. Where are you even going? And now everyone's talking about it.
Hey, let me give you this, because you said something in our conversation before we got on the interview that really intrigued me. You said, I've been talking about this for decades and it seems like only now it's starting to hit the mass consciousness. Mm-hmm. I actually have been doing the same thing. And I've been able to switch into talking about different things around 2016 and then around 2018, realizing that what I came back here to talk about was hitting the mass consciousness, and that's meant to happen. So let me clear something else up. When I came back, I did an interview around 11-ish, 12 maybe, and a person was asking me on the interview, isn't all this stuff just woo-woo? And I'm so, keep in mind, I'm still freshly back from a decade.
Don't you just love that word woo-woo?
Taken out of the matrix of the United States of America. And I had done that at other times, living for extended amounts of time in other countries, but this was the longest, a decade in what could be considered the opposite culture to ours. They honor group harmony. They honor the collective. They don't honor individuality.
How would that be?
That's
what I experienced traveling out of the US too. I loved it.
Yeah, it's sweet. It has its, anyway, without going too far into that. So the guy said that to me and I said, I find that to have that point of view nowadays is just ignorant, when over half of the rest of the world operates with the understanding that energy is actually more influential than matter, and that matter comes from energy, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. And so that is that. So here we are at this point, and you said something about wanting to go into the parts of you that weren't all happy, shiny, joy, everything's great as well.
Yeah, because that means you're either deceived by, in religious vernacular, Satan's taken a hold of you. Okay. Yeah. And I know this is just like actually American culture, because we were founded on these, religious ideologies, these puritanistic values, which is great. But then it gets into such a black, white, toxic masculine, where it's either you're, if you in any way identify with the darkness, then you're lost.
Well, look at back, and I go through this in that first book again. I go through this so much of why are we doing it? Why are we blocking ourselves from looking inside? When, I used to see monks in their robes and at the morning market getting their veggies and driving away on their scooters with their bags of fruit and veggies. I used to see monks in Bangkok at the subway station when I was on vacation, and they were having a cell phone in one hand and a cigarette in another hand. So it was like a reminder for my consciousness of we don't have that in the West. We don't have the flagging of us to understand that we're meant to be working within ourselves. We're meant to manage our own systems, our own consciousness, and working with it. So here, instead, it's been run from it and seeking out external paternal authority figure to tell us what's real and what's not. And that started in the Enlightenment time. But the squelching of the female has been in the West in a way done different than in the East. It's definitely done in the East too, but it's just done differently. And so we've had this patriarchy for thousands of years. And part of the yang, or when we just look at energy flows of the yin and the yang, like the yin yang symbol, for example, the male is the sun, is the active. The yin is the feminine, is the internal. And so as we go through what is considered humanity's greatest evolutionary leap for 20 years, 2012 to 2032, everything's coming back into balance. And so this part is too. So when you said about going into your emotions that didn't feel comfortable, that were yucky, but you felt like you had to pay attention to them in order to be in integrity with yourself, there's a chakra, that's the pelvis. And how many women are comfortable within their hips and their pelvis?
No.
So that's the right. That I know, that's the chakra that's all about. Everyone has a right. Every chakra has a right to it. The first one's your right to be here, for example. The second one, the sacral, is your right to feel the way you feel. Mm-hmm. So it's an inner GPS system. And if we don't require science for everything, if we don't require an external authority figure for everything, if we can assess, I feel happy when I do X, I feel lighter when I do Y, I feel bad when I think and when I do A, I feel heavy and dense when I choose B. That's us monitoring and observing with naturalistic observation. It's the third method of the three main scientific methodology used anyway, naturalist observation. And so if we observe that within our own system, we can eventually, with the help of clearing out stuff that propels us from our unconscious and subconscious to keep making heavy, dense choices, we can eventually come out of that and learn to re-gear our neurology and our choices to honor that which makes us lighter. And it becomes a momentum away from the old, away from the honoring of being heavy as the norm, of being checked out, or the spiritual bypass, like you called it. I love that, as the norm. And instead be present in our bodies and create a thriving life. I mean, that's what it's here for. The subtle energy system. Energy is neutral, but then it's a wave. And then with a thought that's repeated or an intense emotional trauma, we'll claim down that wave with all its potential and at the subatomic level to then become a particle. And when it collapses into a particle, then something's becoming physicalized. So the traditional Chinese culture says, where qi goes, blood follows. So it's basically saying where energy goes, matter follows. And nowadays I add on to that, where our consciousness focuses, energy flows, and the physical follows. And quantum physics knows this too. So the point being is that we are actually empowered with everything. And that's frightening to the masses when they've done no work, especially to the patriarchy when it's been holding on to power the way it had been. It's no longer, it's crumbling. We can see that everywhere. And I talk about that in my last two books. So there is so much to what you're saying, Cherie. It's just so fun.
Well, and with respect to the patriarchy, I mean, they're only playing out a program that's been handed to them. It's tradition. And yeah, it is crumbling. I want to talk about just like this little phrase that you use. And I know you have so much experience and expertise in working in these fields, working with subtle energy and vibrational energy medicine. And what I'm really intrigued about, and you've kind of alluded to this a little bit, but how this world is changing. And this is where the patriarchy comes in. But it's a really good thing, right? It's kind of shaking things up. And you say we are living during humanity's greatest evolutionary leap. And then I heard you say something about 2012 to 2032. So do you want to, I don't know if those are like mutually compatible issues to tackle at the same time, but it felt like they were connected. So we are living during humanity's greatest evolutionary leap. Where are you going with that? I believe it too, but I'd love to hear your take.
Well, so that we can keep this a little bit more grounded in touch point. When I got back around 2011, I was approached by Voice America to do a radio show on the galactic alignment that the Mayans have predicted for December 21st, 2012. Yeah. I was doing nothing whatsoever in my business about that at all. At all. I think it was just because I may have been in the field of looking at the metaphysical. I was approached for that. Whatever. They were following their guidance. I said, let me have 48 hours. I'll get back to you. And all parts of me knew that this was a yes. Billboard size, neon letter, brightness of yes, go for it. Mm-hmm. So I did. And I began interviewing all these specialists. And it's not just the Mayans that said 2012 is this huge time, like Yogi Bhajan said it. It's the end of an era in yoga culture. It's oh my God, I could go on and on. But and you can hear all the excitement, like it's a lid that wants to come off, apparently, to you, Cherie, and your listeners. This rebalancing of what has happened in age before us. That was needed. As you just said, Cherie, the patriarchy, they're playing out a story, and it's what took place as a result of what had gone before it. And now we're moving into a new era, but yet this is considered our greatest evolutionary leap because of everything I've heard and gathered from these experts. I mean, I was even the yoga teacher and energy medicine practitioner on a cruise down to Chichen Itza, the main Mayan ruin that had created the calendar, the Mayan calendar that predicted this. And we had special ceremonies with Mayan shaman there. I was on TV as far away as Poland, actually, because it was such a big deal there for that day. And yeah, it's a big deal. And so it's understood that the old era was one of destruction and the new era is one of construction.
I like that.
So, yeah, so and you can just take that wherever you want to take it. For me, what I understand that to mean is the Dalai Lama, when I was working with some of his texts in a global psychology course I had created before I taught AP Psych, he used to have biannual summits with Western medical doctors, Western psychologists, and they were just beginning to measure meditation and the effects of meditation over at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And so they were having these biannual summits. And one of the things that he talked about was if human beings are inherently good or evil. And I brought this into the literature class when we were studying a certain story and had the kids do some research. And then I shared with them what the Dalai Lama said is that if human beings were inherently evil, we would not still be here. But because I bake the bread, you sew the clothes, he raises the cows, she raises the sheep and the goats and the milk, and we all work together to construct life. We're not inherently, we're inherently good because we're constructive, we're building towards something collaboratively. So this is the era of construction.
Which is all feminine. All of that
stuff. So part of that's coming back into balance is, yes, honoring the actual genderized aspects of the female, but also for our men, having them come back into balance with where they don't have to go out and be the hero or the martyr and sacrifice to earn the money and support the household. And instead, they're also I celebrated this. It just happened this past year in 2021. It was the first time I had seen a diaper packaging with the branding having a father with the baby in the diaper on the package.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, that's progress.
But it's not just keeping the woman at home. It's none of that old stuff. It's in a very different, advanced way because our men, I've had men on my table through the years where their guts were totally torn up because they had made such sacrifices to their integrity in order to honor the business deal, in order to come home with the money. In the competition. So where it's been competition, it's giving way to collaboration and cooperation. And so within each of us, that rebalancing is happening. So where we've been mind dominant, which you referred to earlier on, Cherie, and with these talking heads, it's exactly how I see us as like projectors on top of necks. And we're just like these 35 millimeter projectors walking around on top of our necks. And until we clear our projector and start to see with accurate perception, we're just going to keep repeating the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So this is a great evolutionary leap because we're going from that, as I see it, like that top down, more hierarchical, authoritarian based structural way of running things, honestly, to more of that collaborative, communal
circles.
Yeah. And it's exciting. But, and then we go back to that, like, okay, well, what has to come down, right? And what does that look like? So all the more reason to open up your own, I guess you could say, attune your own frequencies to get the right receptivity so that you can abide this time with feeling empowered and excited and adventured, that you're on an adventure versus that fear-based way of how we've been programmed to go about looking at the dissolution of structure.
So you said something, you have, yes, to what you just said. And you also have your Stand, Speak, and Shine school, right?
Yeah, Stand, Speak, Shine. Uh-huh.
So one of the things you just said, what has to be taken down, and I feel like more like transmuted. So
that's better.
And then transformed after that to its higher form. And we're always seeking the higher form. I mean, if you look at nature, one of the basic Taoist premises is follow nature's way. Be like a plant, be like a flower. So we're always seeking life, more life. And in that Stand, Speak, and Shine talk, discussion, all that's involved in there, I have had so many women come in to work with me when they're carrying with them some restriction on their throat chakra, on they're feeling like they have the right to. It's so interesting to me, Shri. Do you see this? It's like when women are just learning to, I'm going to put it in air quotes, speak up for themselves, as if it's not something that we should naturally be doing, because it hasn't been. So as women are stepping more into quote unquote speaking up for themselves, they have this tentativeness about them where they're like feeling as if conflict is going to naturally ensue if they don't just shut up and smile.
Yeah. Well, and that peacemaker, placating, not wanting to rock the boat energy is not spiritual. And I spend quite a bit of time when I'm working with women one-on-one, or whether we're in a group setting or what have you. And it's the whole reason I started this podcast, is that when you swallow down, not just your emotions, and you talked about that second chakra, that creative chakra, that sacral chakra, where it's always trying to, get us to feel what we need to feel. So men swallow that down. Men, like you said, men have that blockage in that area as well. Their guts are literally twisted. Women, I see this just swallowing down, not necessarily just of their emotion, but of their truth speaking and womb wisdom that is literally rising up from their belly as a knowing. And they swallow it down and smile in order to not make waves. And that energy is no longer, I think we're reaching a point where we know it's making us sick, number one. My grandmother had her thyroid removed. My mother's had thyroid issues. My older sister had her thyroid removed. I have to take thyroid medication. I'm on my way weaning off of it. And it's so interesting to me that this collective silencing, there's nothing pleasant and spiritual about it. And when you push down your own knowing in favor of vibing with the group, then you are you've been assimilated into the matrix. I don't know how else to say it. And I'm not shaming anyone who does it, because I did it for years. But until you get to this threshold point where it's just, you can't bear it anymore, and you have to share what you know.
What if it's not having to get to that crisis point? This is one of my stickier points. I'm not clean and neutral with this one. It's interesting to me that the majority of humanity requires crisis in order to look within. Well, whether it's a physical diagnosis and they try to heal it, I don't usually use the word try, and they go to heal it in some natural means, or it's money or divorce or COVID. What if crisis wasn't needed in order to force, in air quotes, force people to go inside and recognize their power inherent within them? So when you say all of that, I feel like I want to hug you. I feel like I want to hug humanity. I feel like I want to communicate this, that one of the things I've learned in living in Asia was just how seamless one lifetime to another is considered over there with past life and reincarnation. And that, it, by the way, was written out of the Bible and the Commedia at Nicaea in the 300s.
Oh, yeah, it's all over the Gnostic texts. Yeah, it's all over the place.
So I was shocked because, I mean, there's proof out there as far as we're going to get for proof, and I won't go into that here now, but one quick thing is that an MD who got trained in hypnotherapy had a patient who wasn't healing, put her into hypnotherapy. She came out with an Irish accent, told him the pub her family had owned in this other lifetime. He had his assistant go and check out that data, and it was all accurate. So he began to do session after session, and more data, more files, more research, more.
Is that the guy who wrote Journey of Souls or whatever? No.
Many Lives, Many Masters, Brian Weiss.
Okay. Many Lives, Many Masters. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was, and then there's also pictures too. Like one of the things I heard over living amongst the traditional Chinese is that when kids are born with a advanced talent early on, it's a carryover from another lifetime. And we even symmetrically, our faces look the same. So all of that having been said, I know that one of the key things that I am consistently clearing out of women is that they have been hung, guillotined, head chopped, or some form of being shut up in another lifetime when they spoke truth to power. And they could have been a male, they could have been Galileo. But typically for the past couple of 100 years at least, in order for the power that rose in the hierarchy to become what it became, and for the church to maintain order and science to maintain its part of order over society, women with their knowing had to be shut down. And if you look at it, I say, this is one of the things I say the most frequently, is that typically our soul, our mind interprets things the exact opposite as what is meant by from our soul or the universe. So that if women had to be kept down, the reality of that interpretation is because men felt less powerful.
Right.
So yeah, so I find that there's this clearing level, and it doesn't give way easily. It's not that it's so difficult. It just is gradual for a woman to let go of the trauma that happened when she had her head cut off or was had some kind of death due to her speaking truth to power, maybe just punished and thrown and tortured.
Sure. I think we are all holding that trauma, whether it's for an ancestor or, you know, if you don't hold the belief system that there is reincarnation, that's fine too. Just know that we're all swimming in this history and in this, and it's coming down into our bodies, whether we want to recognize it or not, just like systemic racism and all of these other things.
It's all clearing now.
It's all going to start to clear. And I love what you're saying about, you know, why do we have to, why is there a needed crisis until we become empowered or connect to the divine or go inside or access our freedom and sovereignty and voice? Like, why is a crisis needed? I think there's that term midlife crisis because, if you are just going through the motions of life and you haven't awakened to your soul voice by the time you're, I would say maybe mid to late 40s, maybe early 50s for some, it's very different for everyone. It becomes unbearable. Something cataclysmic will happen. And I don't mean that to scare people. It's just the way it works. It's, and I think that we can look at our mothers and grandmothers and generations of women back who, bless their hearts, did not have this awareness and gave lives of amazing service to their families and oftentimes to humanity without really coming into their own power and knowing, because it just wasn't, there wasn't a space for it.
What
and that's why it's so exciting to live right now. And that's why it is the evolutionary leap.
Yes. And then the one thing that you just said that I really would love, because we're getting close to time here, is the invisible, the honoring of the invisible. So that mother's love, that grandmother's nurturance and energy, that which is invisible, learning to now value that equally, and if not even more than the physical, is one of the main areas of rebalancing we're going in right now, which is why it's so timely, the work that I'm doing and the work that you're doing.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Well, Alison, tell our listeners, Dr. Alison, I love that. What is your doctorate in, by the way? I mean, you have so many varied fields of specialty. I don't even know what your doctorate is in.
It's a holistic life coach.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So share with us where we can find your offerings.
So if you're a woman and you're listening to this podcast, it's most likely that you're going to resonate with my most recent book, The Dragon Master Creatrix.
Which we didn't even get to talk about. So you're going to have to come back on, because I totally wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, she was talking about the word creatrix, and that's really fun.
So it's a yummy word.
Yeah, and it's what we're stepping into now. And so I have a third book, Reasonable Dragons, that is kind of a shorter path from A to Z. And then once you get to Z, then there's the Dragon Master Creatrix. It was just released last month and it's on Amazon. And then if you go to the dragonmastercreatrix.com, you can get a bunch of bonuses there, which include videos of me doing special activations from stone circles and Mayan ruins, and a free month of Activate Your Magic, where you will get new moon and full moon sacred clearings and activations. You'll get 2 other events throughout the month with me. All of that's for free just for buying the book. But the book itself is so fun. It's told in a story form of a woman who's seeking her path to power. And she's coming on retreat with me to train in energy medicine. And so half of it's in story form. And the second half of each chapter is where my students are asking me questions they've literally asked me. And I don't really hold back in this book, where I've been taught to, hold on to some ancient wisdom until it's the right time for a person to be able to grasp it and honor that, so that we don't short circuit a person's system. I gave away more advanced, I want to say secrets in this book, The Dragon Master Creatrix, because it felt like it was needed with where we are now. There's so many beautiful people who are really advancing on this path and needing new tools, instead of learning, instead of coming from the head and analyzing everything and figuring stuff out and creating that 1 through 5 target list of steps. It's just not like that anymore. And so we need new tools. Yeah. And so this book presents those new tools in a very real way, but fun to read.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah, we got to get away from that linear based approach. The logical fallacy stuff it's a real thing. So, well, thank you so much. This has been really vibrant, and I will definitely have all of this stuff in the show notes that you mentioned. Thank you so much, Alison, for your time today. This was really fascinating.
Yours too, Cherie. I look forward to more, and just 10,000 blessings to you all. Namaste.
Namaste. Hey friends, thanks for listening to this episode. And just remember that you have the power within you to be the light, to alchemize all your experiences and transmute them into the highest possible version of you. No matter what good, bad, or ugly things you've passed through them for a reason. They make you wiser, stronger, more beautiful, more radiant. So own who you are. And remember, you can find Dr. Alison J.K.'s offerings on AlisonJK.com. Have a glorious week, and we will talk to you next time on Women Seeking Wholeness.